Picture this. You're hurtling upwards in a rocket ship, traveling thousands of miles per hour, when finally you leave Earth's atmosphere, and with it, its gravity. Suddenly, you're weightless. Let's explore what happens to astronauts' brains during spaceflight. A few years ago, a team of researchers from the University of Michigan set out to answer this very question of how the brain changes in space. So, what did they find? Let's take a closer look at some of the parts of the brain the researchers found the most pronounced changes in. First off, let's look at gray matter. Gray matter is a part of our central nervous system, which is made up of our brain and our spinal cord. Gray matter plays a role in a lot of functions, but one of the most important is helping process sensory information. Next, we've got the insular cortex, which is a part of the brain that helps us with perception, awareness, feeling and detecting emotions, motor control, and overall consciousness. Another important part of the brain is the frontal pole, which, even though its function is mostly unknown, is thought to help us achieve goals. We've also got the temporal lobe, which functions in speech and hearing. Another important structure is the inferior frontal gyrus, which helps us with speech and speech comprehension. Lastly, we've got the cerebellum, which functions in balance, voluntary movement, and coordination. Back to the study. The researchers took MRIs of the astronauts' brains before and after they went to space, and they found out that the gray matter in different parts of the brain increased in some areas and decreased in others. The longer the astronauts were in space, the more pronounced these changes were. The researchers decided that these changes were in large part due to the lack of gravity in space. There's a decrease in gray matter in a lot of the areas we looked at. This is because in space, there's no gravity to pull down the fluid that's found in the brain and the spinal cord, known as cerebrospinal fluid. Because of this, it rushed up to the brain and compressed it in different ways, causing a redistribution of the gray matter. The researchers also found an increase in gray matter in the areas of the brain such as the cerebellum that deal with leg movement and sensory information from the legs. They attributed this to the fact that the astronauts were constantly trying to adapt to their new environment in space. Lastly, the researchers found that the changes in the cerebellum of the astronauts were similar to those of patients who are on long-term bed rest. This makes sense because these patients who are on long-term bed rest would be lying down a lot of the time, meaning that gravity wouldn't be constantly pulling their cerebrospinal fluid away from their head. Now, beyond using these findings to better understand what happens to astronauts in space, researchers can apply these findings to learn more about similar conditions that affect the brain. For example, patients who are on long-term bed rest, as we talked about, or individuals with hydrocephalus, which is a buildup of cerebrospinal fluid in the brain. That's pretty cool if you ask me.